All right, welcome everyone. We are very excited to have you here with us today. My name is Mary Beth Gassman, and I'm a professor at Rutgers University. And I also have the honor of being the executive director of the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions, which is one of the sponsors today, along with the Citizens Campaign. We are thrilled to have you here with us to talk about closing the civic empowerment gap. And we have a great panel with us today. I will serve as the moderator, but we also have here Michelle Curry, who is the lead manager and developer of Civic Trust. We have Larry Johnson, who is president of Gutman Community College. We have Veronica Reyna, who's associate director for the Center for Civic Leadership at Rice University. We have Rowena Tomeng, who's president of San Jose City College. And we have Meira Levinson, who is professor of education and founder of Justice in Schools at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And we are very, very excited to be here for this wonderful conversation, again, about closing the civic empowerment gap. We are also very excited to take your questions after we do a more structured Q&A. So please put those in the Q&A feature on the webinar. Please don't be shy. Our panelists are excited. They have so much knowledge and they're so excited about this topic. And we can have a really robust conversation if you ask a lot of questions. So please do. And I am going to hand things over to Michelle Curry, who's going to give us a quick introduction to the Citizens Campaign's teaching tools, because we think it's really important that you know a little bit more about that before we get started with the Q&A. Thank you. All right, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Michelle Curry, and I do work for the Citizens Campaign. I am the chief facilitator of Civic Trust and also helping to develop civic cities across the nation. So our teaching tools are a free resource. It's an online course that focuses on leadership and no blame problem solving, which to me is like the best thing since sliced bread. And we are able to use that online course embedded into existing curriculum in undergrad as well as grad courses across the country. The resource does come with a handbook, Citizens Power, which was written by our founder, Harry Pazicki. It is a 10 module self-paced online course that allows you to move through it at your own pace. There is a pre-test as well as a post-test, so you can gauge what was learned through the course. And it does take attendance, which of course is great if it's going to be used inside of a classroom. So those are the resources that we have available online, as well as support through the staff at the Citizens Campaign and the existing Civic Trust that exist in New Jersey and one in Philly. So I'll hand it back to you, Mary Beth.
All right, thank you so much for that. I love when resources are free. So, and we will be sending out information about the resources, and of course we will. And Natalie on our team just put a link in the chat so you can have access to that. And I don't know about all of you, but as of late, I've just been wanting to be smarter, and I've been doing all kinds of interesting courses and things like that just to like up my skills, probably because I turned 55 and want to be relevant. But anyway, I think it's always a good idea. It's a really good idea. So we're going to start off with a question for Meira. And that is, can you tell us about the civic empowerment gap you described in your book? And for those of you who don't know, her book is called No Citizen Left Behind. Highly recommend taking a look at it. Can you talk about this gap that you describe in your book, and who is affected, and what are the repercussions for those individuals later in life and for our democracy overall?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Mary Beth, and for including me in this really amazing panel. I'm so excited to learn from our educational leaders here. Yeah, the civic empowerment gap, as I discuss it in No Citizen Left Behind, is, as it's called, the gap in civic and political power among different groups of people, basically based on demographic features, race, level of education, income, wealth, native born versus naturalized citizenship status. It's also important to remember that non-citizens have civic rights and responsibilities as well. And there's obviously a much greater gap even there between citizens and non-citizens. And this gap exists basically in every way that we can measure it, right? So there are differences in civic knowledge. There are differences in civic skills. There are differences in levels of civic trust and in civic actions and political actions. And these taken together, along with other features like systemic and structural racism, xenophobia, et cetera, which layer on top of these differences in knowledge and skills and behaviors and so forth, end up exacerbating really wildly the amount of civic and political power that people have, really tied to demographic features, which really is not democratic, right? Like there is no theory of democracy, let's say post ancient Rome. Like there's no theory of democracy from the Enlightenment on that says that based on features such as race or ethnicity or level of education or something like that, you should be able to predict how much political and civic power somebody has, say, to make change in their community, to identify the challenges that we face, to raise things up in the collective agenda as something that is worth addressing, right? But in the United States, more so than in almost any other country in the world, we can make very solid predictions based on people's demographic features, how much civic and political power they are likely to have. We see this obviously at the federal level when you look at, say, Congress, and the fact that that Congress is majority millionaires. Right? The United States is not majority millionaires, right? So the US Congress is not representative in any way with respect to income or wealth, or obviously with respect to level of education. We do have a few members of Congress who are not college graduates, but the vast majority of members of Congress are both college graduates and have advanced degrees, which again is not representative of or larger community. We're obviously racially highly misrepresentative, et cetera. But also we see this at the local level, right? We see this at the neighborhood level. We see it everywhere. And what's important in calling this a civic empowerment gap, this is not a civic achievement gap, right? Because this is not trying to say, let's say, wealthy, native-born, white US citizens are some model or norm of civic and political engagement to which others should be aspiring. That would be crazy and wrong, right? Like we just need to look at patterns of engagement and civic and what people are doing with their civic power, who are white, wealthy, highly, high incomes, highly educated, to think, no, that's not the norm that we want to set, but that they are people with greater power as a group and as individuals within those demographic groups than other people in this country. And this has two implications, then I'll stop. One is it really affects those who are at the bottom of the civic empowerment gap, right? Like civic and political power matter because they help us, again, identify what we want to try to achieve as a society, whom we want to serve and how, and they help us reach collective approaches to making those changes and making society serve ideally, right, the most vulnerable, right? And that actually would serve all of us. And if you have these gaps in civic and political power, and particularly since these gaps match gaps also in economic power, right, in cultural power, et cetera, right? What you do is you get this exacerbation of inequality at every level, which then I think actually makes society worse for everyone, right? It's not just that you have people who lack these forms of power who are suffering, which is true, but we all suffer from living in an unjust and inequitable society. And one of the ways in which we suffer is we suffer because we have a weaker and a worse democracy. And I think we've seen that play out in recent years, in particularly visible ways to everybody. Although it's also been true that this has been visible for decades. When you have a political system that has a pretense to being democratic, but in some ways is fundamentally undemocratic or even anti-democratic, that really harms our capacity to work together to identify problems of shared important concern, to right wrongs in the world, and to make a stronger, more just, and more inclusive society in which everybody can thrive.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think that gives us like a really good context for the rest of the conversation too. So I really appreciate that. I also appreciate your enthusiasm for the topic at hand. I love to see that.
I am
So
very enthusiastic about this.
yes, I love it. I love it. That's great. I'm all about like having high energy. So here's another question I have, and I'll start by directing this toward our presidents, Larry and Rowena. But if others want to answer, feel free. How does the civic empowerment gap show up or manifest at your institution and or in your community? And how would you say that offering civic skills training could help to close that gap? And I'd love for you both to talk a little bit about sort of what your institutions are like. I think that would be helpful for people.
Rowena?
Larry, you want to go first? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Meira Beth, and thank you, Meira, for that great introduction. It really provides a great framework for the conversation. So Gutman Community College is located in Bryant Park, which is in the heart of Manhattan. And you would think that, you know, our college being where it is in terms of the socioeconomic status, that's not who we serve. So our students come to us like most typical community colleges, where students are first in their family to attend college. Many of our students come from underrepresented, underserved, under-resourced, underemployed communities. And that then brings with that when students come, you know, in terms of how can we prepare them to be successful. So I'll share with you a quick story. First week of class, a young man was standing on the campus preparing to come into the college. And when he finally entered into the institution, there was a voter registration booth. And he walked past it. I was standing there and I said, are you registered to vote? He said, why? Why do I have to vote? I said, are you 18? He said, yes. I said, so why aren't you registering to vote? I don't think it matters. It doesn't matter. I said, so let's have a conversation. I said, so because you're saying you're not registered to vote, you're not contributing to many of the decisions that are happening throughout New York City. You should be registered to vote on the local level. You should be registered to vote on the national level. And I began to talk to him about many of the implications as a man of color, why he should be engaging in these conversations. I said, many of the laws, the bills, and all these things that begin to manifest and they become laws, it is because people have voted. It's because people have advocated for such things to happen. I said, so what I need for you to do is to register to vote, understand the importance of voting, and I want you to leave this institution civically engaged. So one of the things that we do at Gutman Community College is that we have a series of general education learning outcomes. We call them our GLOWs, our Gutman Learning Outcomes. In those outcomes, we have one that is centered around civic and global engagement. We are intentionally preparing students not only to be academically equipped to transfer to a four-year college or university or to go directly into the workforce, but we want them to understand the power of their vote, the power of their voice, how they, as students who are from, you know, underrepresented communities, because our college is 90% minority serving, 55% Latinx, so we are federally designated as a Hispanic serving institution. So I share that context to say many of the communities that come, students that come to us from different communities, they really don't understand oftentimes, and back to the point about not seeing the representation of themselves in Congress. But I remind them, you can certainly be a voice, you can advocate, we can teach you how to do that. So through those courses, we're preparing students to begin to understand that their voice matters. While you may not think it is, your one vote can carry a lot of weight in local and federal elections. And also we began to employ the citizens campaign work, and our faculty and staff are now incorporating that work into their first year experience because they want to make sure that their curriculum is culturally sensitive to the students that are enrolling at the institution. So while there are gaps in terms of the students coming from regional communities where voting is not something that's important, being civically engaged is not important, there's housing insecurity that students from community college deal with, there's food insecurities that they're challenged by. So they come and say, why do we have to do all of those things when we already have so many other barriers that we have to contend with? So what I love about Gutman is that we're preparing students, yes, to meet those needs, the social service needs, but we're also preparing them to understand the importance of being civic minded and civically engaged.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And again, I just want to say, I really love all that enthusiasm. We need leaders with enthusiasm. So really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing so much about your institution too. I think it's good for people to kind of understand who's in college, because you're leading an institution that is educating the types of students who are in the majority of colleges and universities, right? Really, really important. Rowena, what about you?
Well, I'm just going to continue the enthusiasm and the energy because I just loved everything that Meira was sharing regarding the civic empowerment gap and what we need to do. That sense of urgency, I've been feeling that for many, many years. And Larry, I have always admired the work that Gutman College has been doing as well. Our institutions are very similar in terms of demographics. So San Jose City College is one college in a 2-college district in California. We're at the heart of San Jose in the Silicon Valley. And if you know a little bit about Silicon Valley, you know, every year we have these reports, these Silicon Valley Index reports that tell us that the wealth disparity gap keeps growing and growing. So the divide between the wealthy in the valley and the very poor is just very striking and has been that way for over a decade, if not 2 decades. So San Jose City College is a dual designated minority serving institution. We are both Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander, and also Hispanic serving. Our Latinx students constitute about 46% of our student population. Our AAPI students constitute over 30%, and it's like that across our district. So within those 2 groups, in relation to the civic empowerment gap, since I've been at City College and I'm approaching my 4 years, I have been really paying attention to the lack of student engagement. When I first came right before the pandemic, we had a very low student engagement, even in our associated students. So during their elections, the population of the student body in terms of voter turnout had been historically low. And then likewise, I did not see that we had very many opportunities in service learning happening at the college. And then, but what I was happy to see is that in certain departments and certain programs, that there was a lot of activity happening in the area of student leadership development and also student engagement. Namely, my ethnic studies department. I have a fabulous ethnic studies department and dynamite engaged faculty. And then I have a series of programs that are targeted specifically for student success and retention for African American Black students called Umoja, another program called Puente for Latinx students. We have another new learning community for AAPI students called LEAP. And then I have an amazing undocu student program called Almas. So when I looked at what was happening in those specific retention programs targeted for those students to be successful, I saw that there was leadership development happening. And then also we were connecting students to what was happening in their local communities outside of the college, in their neighborhoods. And then for undocu students, they were engaged and continue to be engaged in the struggle for immigrant rights, migrant rights, etc. So I talk about some of those programs because those are specific ways similar to what Larry was talking about. And we too partnered with the Citizens Campaign for their curriculum. So from my standpoint as an institutional leader, if we are going to really work on closing those gaps, we actually have to amplify and bring out all of that good work happening perhaps in silos and scale them across the institution, because the more opportunities that we could provide for our students, especially students of color, low income, the more that we can actually build civic hope. So Meira talked about that we have a lack of civic trust, but I want to insert there that we actually have to foster civic hope, because when our students see that when they work together as a collective, they actually make change happen. They make change, they come to my office, they tell me what the concerns are, I bring it to our governance committees, and we're able to be responsive and make change for student success. And then we also give them examples of civic hope in action in our local communities, you know, whether it be workers' rights, immigrant rights, getting a new park set up, and they see people in action working together, participating, and we hope to instill that excitement and inspire them to do the same.
Thank you. And I love the idea of civic hope. Thank you for bringing that up. And also, you know, talking about things on campus as well as community, really, really important. Thank you. Thank you. So I have a question for Michelle from the Citizens Campaign, and that is, can you give us sort of a little bit of an introduction to the training and that you do and how your organization works to close the civic empowerment gap? Can you take us a little bit more deeply into that?
Sure, exactly. I'd love to. This is my soapbox. This is like where I live. So the Citizens Campaign has been around for 20 plus years, working in various communities to empower residents of communities to understand not the fact that they just have a social value and a social voice, but how to empower them to use it to make their communities better. So I was introduced to the Civic Trust in Newark about 8 years ago while I was working in my classwork for my doctorate. And I went to get data for closing the civic engagement gap, which I have to say, Ms. Levinson, you are my shero. And what they were doing, it was a group of people who lived in Newark, where I was born and went to college, Rutgers, Newark. And they were talking about things that in their community that was negatively impacting the life outcomes of the people who lived there. And what it is that we could throw on a table and what it is that we could actually fix. What is it that we can address to kind of change the direction of those outcomes, to make them positive from negative. And one of the things that we talked about was the fact that when we were in school, we learned about civics. We learned about government. We learned about governance. We learned how to maintain our communities and what our responsibilities were to those who lived around us. And as I say to my children who are grown at this point, that your responses and your actions today will trickle down to impact people that you will never, ever meet in your lifetime. And you are responsible to provide resources and tools that people who come after you need to maintain the positive outcomes of their community. That's our responsibility to those that we live with. And that is exactly what the Citizens Campaign did through their civic trust. So we went around trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we put civics in the high schools? Well, there's a guide. I love when there's a guide. And it is called a 10-step no blame problem solving process. So what that allows us to do is to focus on what the social change is that we're trying to move forward, right? We focus, we find an evidence-based model, because if it's broke here, it's broke somewhere else. And then, of course, looking at cost effective, because we are dealing with government for the most part, and the answer is always that there's no money. So how to make it as cost effective or as cost neutral as possible, and what the intended outcomes are versus what the actual outcomes are. Because there always has to be that evaluation piece. Did it work the way we wanted to? And it has to positively impact the whole community, not just some of it. It has to work for everyone. So what we did was we went to the Board of Ed, which of course is one of the power centers in your city. If you want to change anything to do with education, you go to the Board of Ed. And they too agreed that this was such a powerful tool for their residents to learn and their students to learn, that they embedded it in American history too in high schools. So all of the high school students in the city of Newark, which is the largest school district in the state of New Jersey, now use our online resource to learn leadership and no blame problem solving. Also in Trenton, which is our capital, Plainfield, Perth Amboy. So we are working through the cities in New Jersey for them to see, and everyone's getting on board because they see it. They see that social value, someone understanding their social value and their social responsibility is vital to who they are in their community and who they are as a human being. So we have a huge, huge need for this, and people are seeing it. And they're coming and they're saying, how do we do this? How do we teach it? How do we get people engaged? How do we empower them to use their voice the right way? And that's what we've been able to do through some of the civic trusts that we have, and through the national citizen leadership bases that we have at colleges and universities across the country. We've been able to put civics back in the high school. We've been able to reorganize police auxiliaries, which for those of us that lived through Sandy, hopefully we'll never do that again. We know that evacuating senior housing and nursing homes and care centers were a huge, huge issue. And police auxiliary play a large part in evacuating and keeping that chaos to a minimum. We also, created the first civic city in the nation, which I have to say is my hometown of Newark, New Jersey. We also have the second civic city in the nation, which is Trenton. So they have, completed all those elements. And we're working feverishly to have multiple civic cities through this country so that, again, we can use our voice in a way that it positively impacts the life outcomes of those that live, play, and work in the cities that we live in. And I'm going to climb down off my soapbox now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, I love the soapbox. And again, I really love all the enthusiasm that everyone has. So thank you so much. Veronica, I'm wondering if you can tell us about your work with the Citizens Campaign at Houston Community College, and how were students in Texas government empowered by training in leadership and no blame problem solving. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So first, I'd like to say thanks for the opportunity to be here on the panel. And to clarify, so I just recently transferred from HCC from full-time to part-time as a professor in the Department of Government, and I am now a full-time staff at Rice University's Center for Civic Leadership. And at Rice, the center provides civic leadership training for students and a certificate opportunity as well, where they learn these civic leadership skills as well as how to ethically engage with community partners and supporting their capacity building. So I am just now starting to implement Power Civics in the toolkit at Rice. It's diversifying, and I would say I still see a civic empowerment gap at the university as well. Um, but the data really shows the benefits at Houston Community College because of how long we've been offering the toolkit there. So at HCC, it is an HSI. We have campuses throughout the city of Houston, which is considered, one of the most diverse cities in the country. And we offer Power Civics at different levels depending on professor desire throughout the Department of Government. We also provide Power Civics, the online course for our continuing education programs as well. So we open it up citywide, really, as an opportunity to learn these skills. So at HCC, we've been using Power Civics for a few years now, um, primarily with our honors college students because we are able to spend the most time with them. Um, in the past, I've had a whole year to work with the students, both in the American government courses and also the Texas politics courses. And therefore, I can offer a year-long project that we can learn the toolkit as well as apply it on social issues and policy problems that they are most passionate about. And so the students will research this issue. They think about how does this appear locally in their backyard? How does it affect them? How does it affect their neighborhoods or their families? And they use the toolkit to innovate policy solutions based off of their interests. So while it takes a whole year, it's very empowering for the students, and I love to see their changes from the beginning of the semester to the end of the year, not only in their substantive knowledge about politics and policy or their policy interests, but internally in their own empowerment in realizing that they can bring change, that they have the skills to address problems no matter where they appear in their lives. So the toolkit for me really shows the opportunity how we can empower students um, so they know that they can influence the democratic processes throughout the policy making cycle. And I think that's really a key point and the beauty of Power Civics because it helps nurture this participatory civic identity that sees voting as just the beginning of this participation, and that really once you have people in power, the crux of democracy and these processes is holding them accountable for what they do with that power. So elections and focusing on registration and turnout is a large part of what happens in civic engagement, but I think the toolkit also helps empower students to realize there's much more and many more opportunities, non-electoral opportunities to participate in our democracy. I think the other beauty of the toolkit for my students is having them develop a literacy of power and being able to see it and how it works. Often it's very invisible. We talk about it very abstractly, but developing a really concrete ability to identify different types of power, what it looks like, how power works in the policymaking process also is a really important skill that the students learn. And then probably just thinking above and beyond civic empowerment, the students really talk about how they feel that they can use this at whatever career they take, and they're really great problem solving tools, especially if you're having to work with groups or other people and there's disagreement. How do you navigate that situation? And so they tell me that now I feel that I can do this. And so they see the utility of the toolkit above and beyond their political science courses. And what that signals to me is that they're creating, and the toolkit helps nurture the civic identity. Whereas before they might not have seen themselves in these processes or having these skills to influence or use power. And by the end of the year, they have them. I think as an educator, it also shows me how the toolkit is a high impact practice and really supports bandwidth recovery for our students, especially where the reality is a lot of my students are DACA students or international students. And so the trade-off to that then it also helps to support more inclusion in our democracy, and it shows the students whether they can vote or not, whether they're citizens or not, that there's a role for them in participation in our democracy. So the toolkit overall, I think, has been really successful at HCC. We see that in our different government courses. Some professors do projects like I do. Others just use the online course to supplement what they're working on. So in different depths, students are able to learn these empowerment skills and take them beyond the classroom.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I really liked hearing about the application of everything. I mean, that's really, really powerful, and just thank you for that on the ground work too. So Meira, I'm coming back over to you and wondering if you can chat for a minute about why it's important for college educators and higher education leaders to be aware of the civic empowerment gap, especially as we implement training in civic skills. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, thank you. It's been so inspiring to listen to people. So I'm going to come at that question, I think, in two ways. One is, I think it's really important for higher education leaders and faculty and staff to understand the civic empowerment gap, because in higher education, community colleges, four-year colleges, universities, graduate programs, our goals are like multitudinous, but they, I think, all have to be related to empowering the students we serve and the communities that we are embedded within and also serve. And different, institutions of higher education think of their community roles in different ways, right? Land-grant universities think of their community roles different from community colleges, which think of them differently from, say, Harvard, like where I am, right? So we have different conceptions of what our community relationship is, who our community is, what that level of service is, but it has to be that we are there to serve our students and to prepare our students to serve, society in some way, right? And so that means, I think, in institutions of higher education, both to serve our students and to serve society, we need to attend to their civic and political power. That's part of how they actually make life better for themselves and for their and our communities. We were talking, before this webinar started, about a little bit about the academic achievement gap, right? And how important the academic achievement gap has been taken. And I'll note that Gloria Ladson-Billings, has reframed that as an education debt, right? So how significant it is that educational institutions take seriously the demographic patterning of who gains academic knowledge and skills, and the lifelong implications, right, of those patterns. And that over the past few decades, at least rhetorically, there has been a huge shift from basically blaming the students at the bottom of the academic achievement gap and blaming their families for lack of academic achievement, to recognizing that this is systemic and structural, that if we have these patterns, those differences cannot continually be located in the bodies of the students themselves and in their families, right? And when I first started teaching, actually middle school in the 1990s, I heard this often. I heard, well, the kids' heads are in basketball, they're in the girls, like their families don't value reading, like all of this stuff, all of these arguments for why the kids and the families were to blame for the academic achievement gap. And over time, again, at least rhetorically, we have stopped making those kinds of excuses, and we've said, this is clearly structural, right? We are clearly through our structures, through our systems, through our institutions, through our practices, we are creating and perpetuating patterns of inequality and patterns of difference. So we need to reform our systems, our institutions, our processes, our structures, in order to actually eliminate these academic achievement gaps that cannot any longer, we cannot place the blame in the bodies of the students themselves. I think similarly, we have the same kind of obligation to recognize that patterning in civic and political power and take responsibility as a society, again, for saying that these inequalities, these inequities cannot just be blamed on the failures of the individuals who lack civic and political power, right? Any more than we feel comfortable saying, oh, well, it's just natural, say, that an African-American high school senior reads on average at the same level as a white eighth grader. We no longer are willing to admit that that's a natural phenomenon, nor should we admit that it is natural that, say, white citizens in the United States vote at over twice the rate of our Hispanic citizens and Asian citizens. That's not natural. That is constructed. And it's not that institutions of higher education or K-12 schools can totally dismantle those gaps any more than they can totally dismantle the academic achievement gap. And this is part of the reason that Professor Ledson-Billings has reformulated as an education debt. It is a debt that we have constructed and continuing to pay the prices for and the interest on in all sorts of parts of society. But we can play a role in higher education. That's answer number one. Let me give you a second answer, just which I realize I'm going on for a while, but I really want to highlight the wisdom that I've heard from the panelists as they've been talking about how they have been using these materials, which I just think are so exciting to hear about, like the use of the materials from the Citizens Campaign. And this is a second way in which I think it's really important for higher education leaders and faculty and staff to understand the civic empowerment gap and to work on addressing it. What we heard, I think, from Rowena, from Veronica, from Larry, from Michelle, was a set of shared practices, emphasis with students on concrete action, not just on understanding systems and structures, not just on learning the three branches of government or, about federalism or things like that, but about what kinds of concrete action steps can you take. There was an emphasis that we heard on local action, right? A local focus. So it's not just what do those people do over there in government who are different. It's what do we do? What are our civic identities? What are our civic roles and responsibilities and rights, and how do we use those? We heard examples of multiple forms of engagement. We heard of electoral engagement and get out the vote and registering for a vote. And we heard about, civic action projects and, say, talking to elected and appointed officials, identifying community problems and working together in solidaristic or cross-group alliances to try to solve problems, right? We've heard about multiple forms of engagement, which is really important because students and, all of us, we have different interests, time, resources, and as just came up, also different opportunities with respect to our citizenship status. So, right, if we are not citizens, we cannot register to vote, right? And but there are lots of other things we could do. We heard emphasis on building on students' own interests and helping them recognize that whatever they care about actually has a civic dimension to it, right? We heard an emphasis on building civic skills, not only for citizenship, right? So that civics, as you build civic skills, those also carry over into the workplace. They also carry over into other relationships we have actually in the broader community, right? But so these are life skills And they're life skills partly because citizenship is part of our life, but also because these life skills can transfer over into any work that we do in teams, right? Any work that we do as part of an organization, et cetera. And we heard an emphasis frequently on civic hope and possibility, not just what are all the things that are going wrong, but what are things that we can do together to make things go right? And what are some concrete examples? And that is so important. And two things that we didn't hear said, but I want to highlight because I think they were implicitly coming out. One is that through this work, students are not only skill building, but I'm really sure that they're also knowledge building. Oftentimes there's this concern that if you're focusing on civic skills, you're ignoring civic knowledge. And it's like, oh no, we have all these people who are like trying to get involved, but they can't even name the 3 branches of government. And instead, like they know who the judges are on American Idol or whatever. And how can this be? And the thing is, you cannot do good civic work if you don't know stuff about what you're trying to do. And there's a lot of research now that shows that when students are engaged in building those civic skills, they are gaining the civic knowledge to put those skills into action. And then the second thing that I want to note about what we heard from all 4 of these amazing colleagues is that we heard a pro-democracy sort of ideology, but not a politically partisan ideology, right? So what we heard was a description of students being able to do things that might go across the political or partisan divide, right? This could as easily be engaged in by a hard right Republican student, as a radical left student, as an international student whose political standpoints, are really different from how we divide things up in the United States. And I think you can have this pro-democracy and pro-civic orientation and higher education, which we've heard here, without that being politically partisan. Okay, now I'll step down from my soapbox.
Thank you, Meira. I love that, and thank you for all the enthusiasm again. I really like that, and I also like the way that you kind of cut across all of what has been said. I think that's really powerful for us to hear. I want to go back to Rowena and Larry and ask you both a question. So you're both leading community colleges, right? You're both presidents of community colleges. My apologies for that. That is my 92-year-old mother who likes to call every day because she is so engaged. So you're both leading community colleges, and I'm kind of wondering how would you say that this work is particularly powerful or relevant to the mission of community colleges? And Rowena, if you'd like to start, and then we'll move over to Larry.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. And I appreciate Meira's, summary and highlighting of all of the themes that have emerged already. So when I think about this question, I always tend to think of where San Jose City College is part of 116 system of community colleges here in California. So we're all connected, all of our 116 colleges. So for our state efforts from our state chancellor, our mission has become very simple for community college, and it's to put our students first, to put them at the center of all that we do. And then as I look at that mission in relation to SJCC and our mission and our district mission, we add that putting students first means that we are providing them opportunities for equitable academic and student service supports. So that equity piece, that we're providing students with opportunities, to engage in whatever their professional careers, what they choose to do, whether it's in an academic pathway to transfer to a 4-year university. And I'm blessed to have a very large career education division. So if they want to get into the workforce right away, they have opportunities there. And then what I love about being in my current district is that we call out social justice as a central value to what we do in our academic and our student support programs. So putting students first, and then also meeting those values of equity, opportunity, and social justice for our students. And I think for me, what's exciting about connecting, the work of civic empowerment and also that student equity, right? Closing, what we explicitly call out as the racial achievement gap, in our California community colleges. It means that we're trying to do both. And this is how I see the work. Sometimes people see it as an add-on, civics, civic participation, civic engagement, service learning, that is extra, that's an add-on. I actually think that if we're really going to be closing those gaps, and if we're going to really be increasing student engagement in their academics, that we actually also have to be providing them those opportunities to engage outside of their courses, outside of the classroom. And that's why I love what I'm hearing about some of the different tools that we're offering. And then also, when you think of building up the knowledge base, for many of our institutions, our institutional learning outcomes, have embedded in them building, civic knowledge, global knowledge. There's a lot of interest in environmental sustainability. That's a priority in California. And so for our system, we have aligned our mission, like when you drill down and you start identifying goals, we have environmental sustainability and tackling climate change as a system priority, that all of our 116 colleges, including mine, have been asked to actively engage in, for the next 7 years. And then I could name some other types of activities, but certainly for California and for the community college system, civic participation has been identified as a priority. But, I mentioned earlier to Meira that we don't allocate the same types of resources, and the funding levels, are not given, we're within the institutions to these types of programmings, not in the same way as we do around the academic achievement gap. But I don't see them as separate, or mutually exclusive from each other. I see them as interconnected. And I think that's what that's what I try to share with my colleagues in my system.
Thank you. Thank you for all that context too. That's incredibly helpful. Larry, talk to us a little bit about the unique community college environment with regard to this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Meira, and thank you so much, Rowena, for getting this queued up. I mean, when I heard Meira, there are so many ways in which we could talk about this topic in terms of like systemic and structural challenges with even students graduated from high schools and being asked to take entrance exams and using those exams to determine a student's competence. And now colleges like ours are moving to multiple measures of assessment to better support those students. So there's so much there that we have to talk about, because even in that K through 12 system, there's still inequities that impact students' ability to really see themselves and realize some of these conversations that we're having, that they bring with them a power and a voice that's critically important. But like Rowena, we are also in a system. So I'm a part of the City University of New York, and that is a system of 25 college campuses, community colleges, comprehensive four-year colleges, graduate campuses, medical schools, law schools, and also a number of other professional schools. And our university, state of the university, was a couple of days ago, and the chancellor announced the CUNY Lifting New York. And at the core of that is around increasing access and success for students who are from marginalized communities. And most recently, Gutman announced its strategic plan, Gutman Forward 2028. And at the core of that, as Rowena stated, and this must be apropos, is the student. it's the student and equity. And so much so that the first pillar of our strategic plan is elevating diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And in that context, we're beginning to have those conversations. What does it mean to belong to an ecosystem? How do we prepare students to thrive and to also be successful? So as we're having these conversations, we actually have a course that's called Introduction to Social Justice, where we're talking with students about how do they show up their authentic selves, but also as young men of color, wearing a hoodie, what does that mean? What are the perceptions? How can you navigate society? So as we really bring it full circle and talking about global education and the context around which one should be civically engaged, we're helping students to understand in this large ecosystem how they can be successful at surviving. And it's really challenging that we have to have a conversation with students about how do you survive in 2023, but also how do you leverage the laws and how do you leverage what you've learned in terms of your academic achievement married with the spirit of advocacy. And not that we want them to go out and start doing, different types of form of I would say, engagement that we've seen. There's so many different ways in which one could be a part of that ecosystem, but we want to teach them that there are various ways. There's the ways of Dr. King, there are the ways of other persons who have protested, but how do you do it in a way in which you really are understanding what is the law, number one, what are the issues, what is it that you want to change, what is the problem that you want to change, and then do the necessary research. So we're teaching students to be engaged in the research. What is the root cause of this systemic oppression or these disparities or this disproportionality that exists with the students that we serve? And then how can we as a community, as a collective, work with students to empower them to understand how they can get their voices heard? So one of the things that I love and which CUNY does is that every year when we do our advocacy in Albany, New York, with our legislatures, we take our students there and they do a mock Senate. We take them through the day in the life of how things move throughout the House, if you will, move throughout the Senate, and they get a chance to, state their claims. They get a chance to give their opening arguments around a certain theme or a certain topic, and students begin to really understand how they contribute to this ecosystem. Many of the students that are at four-year colleges and universities, what is not oftentimes said is that a significant number of those students who are graduating from four-year colleges have started at community colleges. So if you think about the impact of the community colleges and civic empowerment, and if we're all doing, as Rowena and I are talking about, we will have a better society because our students are leaving our institutions equipped to be successful. And oftentimes you hear about these reports, X institution is making $1 million impact in the community just based upon them graduating and going into the workforce. But what we don't talk about oftentimes is of those number of students, how many of them have taken civic engagement courses, had different opportunities, and now as a result of that experience, they're now senators, they're now, working in public office. And I think those are opportunities that we have as higher education institutions to really begin to highlight how being at a community college or a four-year college, for this context, a community college, how we, I think, are really equipped to take a student who comes to us oftentimes with a GED, no D. We meet them where they are and we make sure that that student is able to truly lead, and we do it from an equity mindset so that they are making family sustaining wages. All of those things in tandem have to be at play when we're thinking about civic empowerment, because as Meira talked about, it takes all of that. It's the academic achievement, it's understanding the law and civics and et cetera, but it's really the holistic approach to how we are truly helping someone to be successful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I have to say, as somebody who works with presidents on a regular basis, to see our two presidents be so enthusiastic and so student oriented is really wonderful. So really, really love seeing that. Veronica, I have a question for you, and that is, can you talk a bit more about kind of what opportunities do you see to close the civic empowerment gap through offering this type of training through continuing education, and what audiences or groups in the Houston area I'm particularly interested could particularly benefit?
Sure, sure. I think I'm going to approach this question initially from being faculty and staff in higher education, and that Power Civics and offering it through continuing education courses provides an opportunity for colleges and universities to rethink their role in the larger communities in which they reside. Some, in talking and working with different community colleges and universities nationally, you know, I often ask, how do you engage with the stakeholders of the community? And the answer that often comes back is, well, we meet with the business leaders all the time. And for me, that's a huge disconnect, and a red flag if we're just thinking about our institutions as pathways for labor, for the business communities, and not really thinking about the people and the neighborhoods in which these institutions are located. And so for me, when I think about this question of how can higher education and community colleges and universities better locate themselves and support surrounding communities, I see my HCC students as City of Houston residents. I don't see them as, I don't see a disconnect between the students in my classroom and the city at large. They reflect that diversity and levels of empowerment. And so I see continuing education then as an extension of that classroom, as a larger part of that educational mission of the college. And it also makes me think about civic engagement pathways, right? So what are these opportunities from community colleges to four-year institutions? And what are these pathways from, higher education, whether it's community college or four-year universities, to the community at large? So the role that Power Civics can play in community education, I think we have yet to explore that profound opportunity. So, as I mentioned before, Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the country, and as other panelists have indicated, we know that power is not equally distributed within the city. And given that history of Jim Crow and redlining, we have our neighborhoods at the neighborhood level are still very segregated. And so when I think about continuing education, it's an opportunity to further this education and developing a skill set um, to show people how to influence throughout the policymaking cycle. And again, what I'm looking at is this larger lens of just civic engagement in general, of which voting plays a part. And of course, how to use power. The toolkit also goes into those details in the nuts and bolts. It goes into media literacy and how to be more savvy about the data and the information that you're consuming, especially in leading policy innovation. It teaches you how to do FOIA requests. And it teaches you how to navigate or circumnavigate institutions and bureaucracies. So in terms of, the civic trust that can develop, or, ideally, eventually, a civic city, what you're looking at is developing those skills as well. Another opportunity that continuing education opportunities provide for me is interrupting this feedback loop of compounding powerlessness, and that communities with low civic engagement are ignored by those in power and democratic institutions, which then further compounds lower civic engagement, which means they're going to be ignored even more. And so Power Civic can literally disrupt that system. And probably my favorite thing about the continuing education opportunity is that it empowers neighborhoods to prioritize their own policy needs with their own policy innovations and put them on the agenda and put them in play in the policy making cycle. And so the big picture for me is that it serves as an avenue for putting people back into democracy and including people in these democratic processes. So it just leads to a higher quality democracy.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you for all of, I just think incredibly valuable information, but I also really loved when you said that you don't see a disconnect between your students and there being, participants in democracy. So thank you. Really, really appreciate that. Okay, so I have one last question for all of our panelists. Anybody can chime in, and then we're going to open it up to questions from you. And I see that we have a number of questions in the Q&A. Please put your questions in. This is really a real treat to get a panel like this with so much expertise and also enthusiasm. So my last question for our panelists is, what might your city be like if everyone had equal access to civic skills and leadership, including disadvantaged students? So how would that change the approach to problem solving and citizens' relationships with local government? And wondering what you all think. And if you'd like to chime in first, just give me a hand up and I will call on you. So, all right, Veronica wants to step in. Let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I've been thinking about some of the comments, especially this idea of civic hope. And I think what's an equally important skill is being able to envision what a 21st century inclusive democracy looks like. And I think that's a space and time we often don't give ourselves or our students or our community members. And I think that's so important because it sets the standard from which communities demand more from our democracy and our institution and our leaders, our institutional leaders. And so I think, being able to envision what that future would be like is just an incredible, I would say, a skill. I mean, not everybody can do that. I think there's a lot of people who just cannot dream out of what's going on right now, and that's understandable. And I think that, that's connected to the civic hope. And I think parallel to envisioning what this inclusive democracy would look like is also asking why not, asking this question of why can't we make it this way, and what do I need to do in order to make this happen. And so that is often a mindset that I perhaps in many respects might either need to be worked on or proceed working with Power Civics, but it's definitely one that I think, at least from feedback from my students, they leave with, that they feel empowered and they can also dream.
Nice. Thank you. Others? Anyone else want to answer that question? Rowena, I see your hand up.
Yeah. So I wanted to just follow up on Veronica's reflections in terms of, really creating and sustaining an inclusive democracy. And I think in relation to, I'm just going to draw parallels. Like when I think of, the mission and the work that Larry and I are doing in community colleges, we're putting students first. We're understanding what their assets are, what they bring to the institution, in their cultural diversity as well, that cultural responsiveness. And so what would it look like if we actually, on a daily basis in our community, in our cities, if everyone just came to meetings and just put people first, put people, community first? We have so many competing agendas, I think, and I don't want to minimize, some of the work that I do at my institution, but when it comes down to it, we have to sift through what are hindrances. Here's a hindrance. Here's sort of not as of a priority agenda to be working on or exercising energy on. And when I am in meetings in the community, I feel like we don't do that very well. You know, when I'm in dialogues on other community boards and other civic boards, you know, the different agendas are always at the forefront. And what would it look like if we could just say our communities are number one? You know, we learned to do that, I think, during the pandemic. You know, we were focusing so much in the Silicon Valley, you know, like across other communities, on focusing on the harm that was happening with essential workers, you know, the loss that was happening with our workers that, you know, couldn't be online, right? Because things still had to continue, our health care workers. Why can't we maintain, you know, that sense of care? You know, why does it have to be a crisis? So I think for me, providing all of those equitable opportunities, you know, for, you know, knowledge, learning, skill development, civic participation, whether or not you're, you know, documented, you know, a documented citizen, I think, you know, that can lead to instilling that community people first mentality when our students, at least for me, I'm excited when I see students transfer and that they continue to be engaged. And as Larry mentioned, you know, we have many alumni that are, you know, getting involved in local elections, elected offices, boards, and we need to bring them back so that they can share their experiences and why it matters, you know, to our current students.
Thank you. I'm gonna have one more person chime in here so we can open it up for questions. Meira, I know that you wanted to chime in, and then we are going to go to audience questions. Thanks.
Sure, I'll just chime in briefly. I was thinking about, so I live in Boston, what Boston would be like if everyone had equal access to civic skills and leadership, including, you know, historically marginalized students. And I think it would necessarily be radically different. I actually talked at the end of No Citizen Left Behind about one of my students. I was at the time teaching 8th grade in the Boston Public Schools, how my students saw a large park in our city, Franklin Park. He lived on one side of it in Dorchester, and I live on the other side of it in Jamaica Plain. And our perceptions of the park and our perspectives were just very, very different, because his experiences of parks was of them as actually fairly dangerous places, physically dangerous. And my experience of parks was not, and is not. It's a place that I could take my then young kids and walk our dog, and it's a very welcoming place. And as I thought about what it would mean for his perspective on parks to be heard and recognized, it would mean that we would radically rethink our design of parks, our how we think about access, what kinds of programming we would offer, et cetera. And changing parks is changing the very fabric of our community. It's about creating spaces, ideally, where people can come together across lines of difference, where we can actually, you know, co-occupy spaces where we're so often segregated because of, say, the history of redlining, you know, et cetera. It's about the reimagining what environmental justice looks like, right? Reimagining spaces for work, for play, what it means actually to be sort of treated as a human being in a city who deserves a space to breathe and clean air to breathe, and so forth. And so I think, you know, if everyone in Boston had equal access to civic skills and to civic leadership, what problems we dealt with, like what we identified as being problems, would really radically change. What our universe of potential solutions would also really change. Right. So young people led a walkout from the Boston Public Schools a few years ago about the budget for the schools, and their perspectives about living it on the ground, about where the money was going and where they didn't see money going and what they needed. Right. They were derided by some adults as being pawns of the teachers unions or whatever, right, like as young people so often are. But they just wanted to walk out of school. But no, they really want more opportunities to learn. They recognize what it means to be treated as second-class citizens, or as half citizens or whatever, right? They know, because they can feel it, and they desperately want greater educational opportunities. And so I think we would focus on different problems, have different universes of solutions open to us, and actually have a much stronger and more thriving and vibrant community as a result.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everybody. All right. So I'm gonna start asking some questions from the audience. So here's the first one, and I love this question. I'm working in a 7th grade Florida civics class with many Hispanic students. How can I teach them the power of being civically engaged? Many of them are online on social media. How can I intersect this into the curriculum? And that is from Sophie. So just wondering who might want to take that. Meira, I think you volunteered to take it. So what do you think?
Yeah, so as a longtime civics teacher in the Atlanta and Boston public schools for many years, and somebody who's worked on civic education a lot since, I love this question. And I actually want to join it with the question from Gloria, who's in the Plainfield, New Jersey school district. And she said, why not start in 8th grade? Yes, we should start it, way before 8th grade and 7th grade. But there's so much that you can do in middle school, in fact, to support civic learning and engagement. So everything actually that I heard described about what young people in higher education are doing through the Citizens Campaign, and using the resources that are available, like just take it and use it with your middle schoolers. There are also actually some really great examples of programs and curricular materials designed for middle schoolers, actually to support their civic learning and skill building and engagement. There's one link that I think Natalie can put in the chat. So the Democratic Knowledge Project, which is led by Danielle Allen, who is like a civic superstar, and so many other things. They actually just released their 8th grade civics curriculum that was co-developed with educators in Massachusetts, piloted, redeveloped, and so forth. It's gone through like 3 or 4 iterations. It was then scaled and tried out again by civic educators in the middle schools, and I think 16 different districts, really a wide array of districts, and they've just released it to be freely available to anybody around the world, actually, to use. It's a really well-designed curriculum and really well vetted by teachers all the way through. And so that is actually a really terrific resource. Also, I'll send the links to Natalie to put in the chat in a minute. The Educating for American Democracy initiative, which is a bipartisan, a really cross-partisan initiative to try to set up some frameworks for helping young people think about what their roles are in an American democracy. It's both history and civic. They have some really great resources. There are programs like Generation Citizen around the country, and Mikvah Challenge, that work directly with teachers and with middle schoolers on civic empowerment. And again, I'll send this a link too after I stop talking. Sam Weinberg at Stanford University School of Education has actually been focusing a lot on students' online engagement and how that relates to civic engagement. And he has a really fascinating civic literacy curriculum that's available there that he created with Justin Reich at MIT. And also Joe Kahn, who's at UC Riverside, has also done a lot of work on students' online civic engagement and how we can actually direct that into really productive ways. So I'll throw a whole bunch of links at you over the next few minutes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And
Can I add,
yes,
a
yes,
little bit to
Veronica,
that?
please do. Yeah.
So one of the disconnects that I see with my students coming into HCC is really some basic skills. So if I know if they're coming into HCC, that means they're not addressed at the high school, which means they're not addressed in middle school or lower. And that is a literacy of power. And what I do to work on that is we start with Eric Liu's LIU TED Talk on what is power. It's 7 minutes long, it's animated, and I believe there might be curriculum involved that has been developed by TED for that video. But it's a very accessible way to make this mushy idea very concrete. And so it identifies 6 major forms of power and 3 laws of power. And this has so much leverage and utility from, it'll be for the whole year, however long you're with the students, because they can practice applying these concepts in everything that you're doing. It's a thread it's a literacy that runs through everything that you're going to be working on with them. And then the other disconnect is just very simply understanding how their lives are affected by policy. And so anything you can do to support that recognition. In class, I often start with, okay, let's wake up and start our day. And we go through the entire day of the most common, places and things that students do throughout the day and where they go. And they try to identify where is government, where is policy. And of course, it starts off very slow, and then they eventually pick up essentially that there's no aspect of their life that's not affected. But I think if they can make those connections between their interests, their experiences, their day-to-day lives that are affected by just a myriad of policies, that also has a lot of leverage with everything else you're going to be doing. And then iCivics, I don't know if you've worked with iCivics before, but they have a parallel organization that has been developing state recommendations for civic education standards. Not all states have standards for what civic education should include, like they do for math or SLOs for English, or standardized tests for any of these subjects, right? And so, it'd be a great applied project to think about what your state has in terms of recommendations and how they could influence that, whether it's at the school board or at the state level.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think we have a little bit of time for some of these questions. We got a whole bunch of them, but here's one that I was really curious about, and I would I'm sure anyone could answer, but I was kind of curious about Larry and Rowena. How would you encourage your colleagues at your institution, and I know lots of folks have colleagues here, to take this training themselves? And would that be something you think would be advantageous? And I don't even know if you might have done it already. So just curious what you think.
Yeah, I would certainly say that our faculty are engaged. So they're actually using some of the principles and values to integrate that into our curriculum in terms of our first year experience. And they're revising curriculum based upon some of those practices. I would say it's difficult to sometimes encourage people to do something that they already resist. So what my practice has been is to focus on those who are already equity minded and they understand the moral imperative. Yes, we want all faculty and staff to, write culturally responsive pedagogical practices and teach from a lens of equity, but we have to be honest, that's not their thing, that's not what they practice. Yes, they're in education for their own different reasons, but I think we have to present the why. I always talk to my faculty about Simon Sinek's work, getting to why. Why are we doing this? Why do we want you to go through this training? Why is this in the best interest of our students? And I think the starting with the why will also help us to encourage more of our faculty and staff to engage in this work, because our staff, we can probably mandate a training, but oftentimes with faculty in terms of governance-based environments, it's a little bit more challenging to say you need to be at this training, you need to be there at a certain time. But if you take the approach of understanding the why equity is important, we serve a diverse student population who is oftentimes marginalized, underserved, under-resourced. That is the why, and why this training will help them to be better faculty and staff in order to prepare those students for greater success. That sometimes will increase the likelihood that we see more participation for such a training.
Thank you. And Rowena, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with Larry, and I just wanted to also share that since we've been partners with Citizen Campaign, I think for City College with the, addressing the pandemic, what have you, that we actually have not been able to implement it in the way that, we need to in relation to our other professional development activities. And so part of what I'm doing this fall is I'm sort of splitting up some of the responsibilities, because we do need a champion. We do need to also inspire champions at the institution so that we can do that work of culture change, whether it's around closing the equity gaps, academic gaps, but also when you do introduce what folks on campus perceive as new initiatives, and faculty also are interested in, will there be funding for professional development? And so we do have funding for professional development, but I'm working on a faculty champion or champions on the academic side, because this work started for me when I got to City on the student affairs side. And it's predominantly been focused on voter education, voter engagement. Meanwhile, I do have faculty in other departments, as I mentioned earlier, who are actually doing deep work around student engagement, focused on specific local issues and campus issues. And students have been developing their self-efficacy, and their voice. So I think in summary, for me, what I would encourage my colleagues to do at other institutions, is to really think about who you are going to have lead this work, on your campus, and then really support your colleague who will be leading by providing resources, and then also making sure for college presidents that you identify this as a priority, in terms of your work around academic achievement and student success. So for me, I've built in, civic participation skills and growing that student engagement in my new 10-year educational master plan, and then my strategic goals that follow.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, friends, we are at the 2:30 Eastern mark, so that means our webinar is almost over, but I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to this incredible panel that was just filling our minds with knowledge and resources and enthusiasm, which is really, really exciting. And, I think occasionally we all get a little down and think there isn't a lot going out there to save our democracy. And this panel made me feel really, really good that there's just so much going on and so many organizations and so many great efforts. And so I want to say thank you to all of you for participating. Thank you to the Citizens Campaign for co-sponsoring this with us at the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions. And always big thanks to Natalie and Giselle, who are working behind the scenes to make sure that everything goes well. So thank you, everybody. And we will be recording this and sending it to everyone. So enjoy the rest of your day. Take good care, everybody. Bye.